All right, what's going on, Internet? Welcome to Office Hours number 2, where I'm actually going to answer your questions and also share some random ideas or thoughts that I had throughout the week in relation to AI. So, we have 2 questions in from viewers, which is great. So, our first question here is it possible to specify the search query, for example, in Google when you specify if it's a PDF only? So, it's talking about deep research, one of the videos I made. And this is from, we'll do D7X because I can't really pronounce, I'm sorry, for the first part of the name. All right, so with that being said, to answer this question here specifically, is can you actually do deep research specific requests with certain parameters? So the answer shortly is no. So you can't actually set certain parameters for deep research to look at PDFs only or things like that. But with that being said, you can actually specify certain things to ensure that it is looking at those items. So I wanted to give an example here of a prompt that I tested out for this question. So it's, do you have some market analysis? So I basically asked it to do some market analysis on companies that are within the space of luxury picnics in the US, et cetera, et cetera. At the very end, I say, okay, only use PDFs from the internet. Anything that you read should end with a .pdf in the URL. So when you do this, and you could do this for Perplexity, OpenAI, et cetera. I'm just going to do Perplexity because it's faster than all the others. Is it actually, when I did this for my first test, it actually pulled probably 80 to 85% of its sources were PDFs. So you can direct the model to focus on certain types of formats when you're doing research or deep research, but you can't necessarily set parameters yet. I'm sure in the future, there's going to be all types of parameters we can set with these tools. But right now, the best thing you can do is actually just direct the model in a certain direction. And as you can see from the results here, if we go to sources, 67, well, that's a big number. You can see this is a PDF, this is a PDF, 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 PDF. This one looks like not a PDF, but there might be a PDF on the site. So you can see there's a lot of PDFs in here. So if I went through and counted these, I'm assuming that 80%, there's like a ton of these are PDFs. It's hard to find ones that aren't. And then even that when there's not a PDF, it's going to an abstract that was a PDF. So the directing the model itself is actually quite effective at getting the model to show or at least to search for PDF-like URLs. So you can direct it, you can't set parameters. Our next question comes from XF2PE. And the question here is, how do we make sure the integration between different chunks works? If AI develops each chunk separately, when I want to attach, say, chunk 2 to chunk 3, how does that make sure that these two are fit together, especially if there are details, especially in their details? So with this, I think this was partially a misunderstanding on how I explained something. So I probably didn't explain this effectively. So I think there was a misconfusion here with the chunks. So the point that they're asking about is a blog post that I talked about in relation to this video. I wonder if I actually can go into this video. Do this, watch on YouTube. All right, we'll watch an advertisement. And the blog here is what we're talking about in relation to chunks. And in here, I was talking through the process of how I actually create applications with these tools. And there's a different process that you can use to actually create a greenfield applications through a 3-step process, one of which is creating chunks. And when you ask to create chunks, let's go to the statement that has that here. You can see it right here in this statement. So once you have a solid plan, break it down into small, iterative chunks that build on each other. Look at each of these chunks, and then go another round and break it down into smaller steps. So the point I'm making in that video, and I'll make here again, is that it's not necessarily the chunks are separate or are kind of disparate. They're actually coming from the same exact model. So we're going to ask a model to create ourselves a blueprint. And the first thing it's going to do, it's going to have a chunk 1. And that chunk 1 is going to be an overview. So this is going to be macro. And then as we go through this, it's going to get more micro. It's going to get in more weeds and detail of how something should be implemented when you're using AI and building with AI. So chunk 1 here is going to basically be an overview of the blueprint at the highest level. And then we're going to do another chunk. This will be chunk 2. And then will be chunk 3. And I think there's only 3 iterations with the AI from my experience. And as it gets into more and more detail for each one of these chunks, it's going to kind of explain how to actually build this application out that we've given it based off the previous spec we've built. So quick kind of summary of what all this stuff works and how this functions is when you use this process to build applications with AI, you first get a spec. And this is the what. You then have it build a blueprint. Blueprint. And that's what we're talking about here. And this is the how. How do I actually build what you've mentioned above? And the last, we give a to-do list. And the to-do list it kind of is our strategy to implement all of the above. And it's something that we can come back to on an iterative basis. So this is the process that I was kind of trying to explain, and hopefully it makes a bit more sense now, because everything is coming from the same model. They're not going to be separated. They're going to be the same thing, said in different ways in more detail, so we can have the model that's building for us refer back to the blueprint, and it can see each one of these chunks in its context and know exactly what we're building, focus on the thing that matters, which is the micro, and then follow the to-do list of building that application. So hopefully that answers that question for that viewer. With that being said, please do ask additional questions if you do have questions, and you can always ask those and I'll answer them in future office hours. Okay, so next is random thought of the week. And my random thought of the week this week is that prompt engineering education as a whole is likely going to become obsolete. And the way that we teach people prompt engineering is going to have to change and be more adaptive, because the models, as they shift and get better, we're going to have to be able to prompt them more effectively, because the way that we prompt these models that are evolving will change as well. So let me explain this in some examples. So we'll first start with how do these models actually work? Let's actually move this over here, and I'll share with you some of the common tactics people like to share when they call out prompt engineering practices. So we have, first we'll get a little title here. So prompting. And the common thing you see within prompting best practices is somebody will say, okay, we need to add a role at the top. So give your AI a role. After that, give them a task. After you've given them a task, you then can add little quirks like this, like chain of thought reasoning, and we'll come back to this in a second. They'll add steps, so giving the AI detail of the steps it should take. Then you'll have the output format. So this is basically saying when you output what you kind of think through, it should be in this specific format. In addition to that, we have examples. And then the other one that I've written down here is reminders. So this is not always the case, but sometimes you'll see reminders here. So we'll just add like a little question mark here, because it's not always the case, but sometimes you'll see reminders. And then I'll add one more thing here in between those, which is kind of a meta thing that you see applied to system prompts, which is the formatting. So is it using Markdown as a delimiter, or is it using XML? So what is a delimiter? A delimiter is, simply put, a way for the AI to understand the delineation between certain parts of the system prompt. So it can say, okay, this part is for this purpose, this part is this for this purpose, etc. And a way to delineate between sections is using Markdown for OpenAI. So OpenAI likes to use Markdown. OpenAI, and then XML tends to be Anthropic, which is the Claude. So this is the similar tactics for formatting. So this is our structure, and there's different variations of what you'll see here, but oftentimes it's something like this. And just to prove the point here, I want to share with you a kind of an example of how prompt generators currently show how they prompt things, or at least generate their prompts. So here's Anthropic's prompt generator. So if you put in a prompt for this prompt generator, it's going to create a more methodical prompt. So right here we have a very basic prompt. It's just 3 sentences. I'm asking it to act as a market researcher, research picnics for me, creating a picnic business. It's really hard to say fast. And then figure out the business model, all those things, and then also research these things. So it's a very basic prompt. I do generate, it's going to be a lot longer. I'm going to do the same thing for Playground for OpenAI. This is a prompt generator from OpenAI. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to kind of make this a lot bigger, similar to here. So you can see this is a lot longer prompt. So it generated and it added all those best practices that I previously mentioned in our steps here. So you can see it has the role, it has the task, it has more specificity around the task where you should focus. It gives even where the input's going to come from. It gives it the steps that I mentioned previously associated to the task. It gives the output format. So how should it be structured when it responds to me? And then we have the reminders down here. Same thing for OpenAI. We have the task itself. I think there is no role here, which is interesting. The task, it gives the steps, it gives the output format that I mentioned previously, some examples associated to that output format, and then reminders at the bottom. So you can see this is a common practice, even followed by the best research labs of how to prompt and how to create system prompts. But like I said, this is becoming more and more obsolete. And so why is it becoming obsolete? Well, if we look at some of these, for instance, oh, that's a big one. We're going to have to make that less thick. Bring that down to like, try 10. Okay, so chain of thought is one, where we have reasoning models. So we have O1, we have Claude 3.7, all these different models. We have O3, we have DeepSeek's R1, 3.7 from Claude. all these different reasoning models that think prior to responding. Well, oftentimes this little hack right here was trying to get the models to think without having to do this. So this is no longer relevant for reasoning models. And my prediction here is that most models in the future will be reasoning based. And the reason for the reasoning is that the inference cost will lower drastically. And as the inference cost lowers drastically for test time compute, which is compute that happens at inference, that means the speed and latency will decline as well. So we're going to have faster reasoners that are higher quality. So you don't necessarily have to wait as long for them to respond. So my guess is that generative models, that are the ones that you usually use this tactic for, will become less and less. And then reasoning models will become more and more used, which means that this specific tactic will no longer be useful. Another one that I think will become less useful is going to be steps. So I think steps, or at least asking the model, giving it very specific steps of saying, hey, follow these certain steps, will become more and more obsolete or less and less useful because of tools like deep research. So as you know, or as you are likely aware, deep research there's a feature that's come from Gemini, OpenAI, Grok, Perplexity. All the big research labs are pushing this deep research agentic use case. And this agentic use case is basically making this specific step obsolete in a sense, because if you use these tools effectively and the way that they're expected to be used, they actually create their own steps. And they not only create their own initial steps based off of the initial ask you've given the agent, but it iteratively builds on the steps given initially and kind of adds more steps as it goes and learns. So it might list out some steps. So this is steps from group one. And then after it learns from this and it does its research and it keeps moving on through the process, it's actually going to add more steps to the next iteration. And then it's going to keep doing this over and over and over until it achieves the specific goal you've given it for the research it should do. So by you giving it steps in the beginning is actually kind of, in a sense, useless because it's going to create its own steps in the context that actually matters for the ask you've given it. So this is just another one of those tactics that are not going to be useful. Now, the point of me walking through this and kind of sharing my prediction with you is that if we are going to teach people how to prompt engineer effectively, the teaching should be evergreen. And the teaching things we talk through should be adaptable to the models as they evolve instead of saying, here's a static thing that works today. And sure, that's useful, but I think if we do that, we should caveat and say, hey, I'm giving you some tactics that are useful for the models today, but note that you should be adaptive in your learning style and use these models to figure out what else works, because as they move, so should we. Now, what are some evergreen things that we could talk through? So I have 3 noted down here that I wanted to share with you. So we'll do EG for evergreen. That's not a G, this is a G. Okay, so the first one is to be specific. And what do I mean by this? I mean by this that words actually matter. What does that mean? That means that when you give a system prompt to a model, you should be very choosy about which words you share with it. And reason being is that words are very vague things that have a variety of meanings to whom's reading it. And the importance of using words effectively ensures that the model is directed in the way that it should be. An example here that I can share with you is I often see people doing summaries of give me an extremely detailed summary. By using extremely detailed and summary next to each other, it's somewhat of a contradiction to itself. And then also you'll see give me a brief summary, which is being redundant about saying the same thing. And it's important that we're very specific in the words that we use against these models so we can actually ensure they're being directed in the way that we would like them to be. That's one thing that will likely be evergreen until the models actually start prompting us effectively and we just answer their questions and they kind of know where we should go. So that's one evergreen option. Another evergreen item here is providing context. And the amount of context we provide will vary over time. My guess is that the more context we provide today, the more effective models are right now. But in the future, the models will likely have a kind of ever knowing understanding of our context, depending on the type of model it is, because it'll be gathering context from all of the things that we interact with, not just directly from us. So for the time being, the context we need to provide these models is better if there's more. Over time, what's going to happen is the amount of context we need to provide to these models is going to decline. And that's coming directly from us because, like I said, it's coming from other places, not just me. And then the third one I wanted to share with you is being actually descriptive instead of prescriptive. Script div. I think that's spelled right. If not, I scribbled it enough so you can't read it. All right, what do I mean by this? Well, with right now, a lot of the system prompts are prescriptive, meaning that I'm saying, hey, I want you to write in this style, you should output in this format, you should do this thing and that thing in this way. And we're trying to basically tell the model exactly how it should do what we want it to do instead of asking or kind of describing what we want. And this is a common tactic people use today for most system prompts. My theory is, and actually kind of it's manifesting today with reasoning models and other types of deep research models, is that the importance of being descriptive is going to increase. We're going to need more of this and less of this. Reason being is that with descriptive, we're talking about the what. Prescriptive, we're talking about the how. Most of the time, AI is going to know better how to do something than we do. So what we need to do is we need to explain and detail what we want the model or what we want from the model, and it can figure out how to do it itself. And this is really going to be one of those evergreen things as well. All right. And with that being said, internet, this was another office hours number dos. So if you like this, please like it, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And if you'd like to work with me, I have an AI consultancy that we help people implement AI internally to automate different processes and increase their productivity. So if you'd like to see if there's a good fit for us, there's a free call below. You can click the link and we can book a call for 15 minutes to see if there's a good match. With that being said, internet, I will see you next time.